I have a question I want to ask you about fish oil. There was a recent study that showed a 0.18% increase in AFib with fish oil, which of course was a very surprising result for those of us like me who've been taking it for 30 years.
Yeah.
Tell us about the importance of fish oil in the diet, why we take it as a supplement. Has your opinion changed because of that study? And what do we need to know about fish oil?
Yeah, so let's go back to Dyberg and Bang really quickly, where the Denmark investigators that went to Greenland in the 50s actually, started to look at the Greenland Inuit Eskimos and find out that they were eating like 80% of their calories or more were from fatty fish and mammals, and yet they had no cardiovascular disease. They didn't have AFib. And this seemed like a paradox because everyone was saying fat was cardiovascular risk. So they started examining this, and lo and behold, they found that it was very rich in this unusual kind of fat, omega-3 fatty acids, particularly EPA, eicosapentaenoic, and docosahexaenoic, DHA. And so they started publishing evidence, and at first everyone pushed back on that and said, no, that can't be the case. But now, literally thousands of clinical trials later, we see that lo and behold, these omega-3 fatty acids are very, very important for vascular dynamics, for hemodynamics, for the whole nature of how our immune system functions. They play roles in all of that. They're precursors to all sorts of downstream compounds, including what are called pro-resolving mediators that help to attenuate inflammation. This sounds all good. So what's the big thing now? Why the controversy? The controversy is because the chemical industry got a hold of the EPA story, and it started saying it's a horsepower story. The more we can then make EPA and DHA high percentage in a product, the better you're going to be. It's like the pharmaceutical model. So we're going to chemically modify the natural oils from their original form, which is called triglyceride, and now we're going to put them into a new form called ethyl ester, so we can make them highly concentrated, a drug-like form. Now we're going to administer it to people, and like all drugs, certain diseases like hypertriglyceridemia can be treated with the drug, but then you get side effects of people who are not responding favorably. So we've unfortunately chemicalized this story. We started off with a nutrition story. It had the natural PRMs, had the natural vitamins in it, like vitamin A and D, and had the natural EPA and DHA with a whole host of other omega-3s. Those are the ones we've concentrated on, but there's a whole portfolio. That has always been shown to be associated with better health, better vascular, better immune health. But now we get into the pharmacological effects of a chemically modified, highly purified form of fatty acids that we call EPA and DHA, that are these ethyl esters, and now the story is not so clear.
Wow, I did not know that, because I've heard of this debate about the triglyceride form versus the ethyl ester for so long, and I never knew if it was just a mountain in a molehill, kind of thing, or if it was a really serious issue.
Well, it's interesting because Dr. Bjorn Dyberg, that I talked about as the Dyberg and Bang group that first went to Greenland, he has studied then, he's now in his 90s, but he's continued to do science, and has studied the ester form versus the natural triglyceride form. Found that, as you might expect, in the natural triglyceride form, it's more absorbable, it has better effects of cellular uptake, it's more able to be precursor converted into these favorable downstream metabolites. So I think that we got into this whole pharmacology model that more is better, and we don't always think that more is better.
That is a real clinical pearl to take home and understand. So it really isn't the fish oil, and the studies that were done didn't distinguish between people taking fish oil supplements that were ethyl ester and fish oil. This happens a lot, doesn't
Yes,
it? They look at meat studies and they don't distinguish, or they didn't until recently, between processed meat like salami and pepperoni and grass-fed, meat that has never had a steroid or. And those distinctions are really, that's the...
Well, you can even apply it to carbohydrates. In science, they just talk about carbohydrates.
Right.
But hold on, what's the source of the carbohydrate?
Cauliflower, and it's a Snickers bar.
Exactly.
Come on. It's
exactly
very different. That's a real God is in the details kind of situation.
Yeah, so as we've looked at this, we've really gone back to nature and said, so in a fish that has lived in a certain environment and eaten foods that are rich in natural EPA and DHA with a whole array of compounds in it, what is the difference between that oil extracted from that fish versus fish farmed or chemically modified or converted into an ester form? And we find that there are very significant differences. In fact, it's interesting to note that in the Arctic, The fish that live there that give rise to then fish oils that are derived from those, like salmon or cod, they depend upon the amount of algae that grows in the ice. The algae in the ice is what starts the EPA and DHA to be formed in those fish. So the algae in the ice then is eaten by phytoplankton, by zooplankton. Zooplankton are eaten by littler fish and bigger fish until finally it ends up in the livers of cod, or it ends up in the meat of salmon. And so that is a very different thing than fish farming, where you have that same, you call it a salmon or a cod, but you're feeding it animal food, and you're giving it antibiotics, and you end up affecting the whole system.
Understood. I have one last question. Atlantic versus Pacific salmon. I've always said and believed Atlantic salmon, no good. It's fed grain. It's the equivalent of factory farmed meat. Go with the Pacific wild. Am I right?
That's exactly right. You know, Alaska is the only place in the world where they have a rigorous law against any fish farming. And so there is no tainting of the gene pool by putting genetically altered fish in there and feeding them things and giving them chemicals. So that's why we've landed on the Alaska as being the best source of natural omega-3s.
Agreed.